This is Cape Town's catastrophic water problem.
This is Cape Town. Settled more than 370 years ago, it is the oldest city within the country of South Africa, as well as the nation's second largest city with a metropolitan population of more than 4.8 million people that contribute a full 10% of South Africa's entire GDP. Consequently, Cape Town is one of the 3 capitals of South Africa. It is a very significant city, but with a very significant problem. Just 4 years ago in 2018, there were genuine fears that Cape Town would become the first major city in the world to completely run out of water. At the beginning of January 2018, Cape Town city officials estimated that within just 3 months, on the 12th of April 2018, on a day that they were referring to as Day Zero, the city's water supplies would effectively run out. The municipal water supply would essentially shut down the majority of the taps, and the more than 4 million people who lived there would be forced to visit one of the 149 water checkpoints that were to be set up across town in order to acquire a very limited daily water ration. Cape Town was quite literally teetering on the brink of a water apocalypse and a mass exodus of refugees. And while the infamous Day Zero never ended up arriving and the city weathered it through the storm, it's important to consider how Cape Town even got to this point in the first place, and how it, as well as other water-vulnerable cities throughout the world, might get to a similar point again in the future. Geographically, Cape Town is located directly adjacent to a massive body of water, the Southern Atlantic, but that's entirely salt water and unsuitable for drinking. Hundreds of years ago, during the 17th century, long before the completion of the Suez Canal, the quickest possible route for trade ships to take between Europe and the Far East was around the African continent. And consequently, the Dutch were seeking to build an outpost somewhere along here in southern Africa to serve as a resupply depot and layover spot for their ships making this agonizingly long journey. This required searching for a good natural harbor to park their ships in that would protect them from the unpredictable fury of the ocean. But unfortunately for them, there weren't very many good natural harbors to select from anywhere in southern Africa. Table Bay was selected as the best possible location for the supply depot to be constructed at, not necessarily because it was the absolute best harbor available to defend against the elements, but because it actually contained a series of rivers nearby that could provide ample amounts of fresh water that every better natural harbor in southern Africa lacked. Thus, Cape Town was settled here nearby to the harbor of Table Bay and the rivers, and today, a series of 6 modern dams constructed on these nearby rivers provide essentially all of the modern city's water storage. However, these dams and the water reservoirs they provide to Cape Town are only as good as the environment they're located within. This area of the African continent is within a Mediterranean climate zone, meaning that there are warm and dry summers accompanied by cooler and rainy winters. These 6 dams and the reservoirs of waters they hold behind them rely almost entirely on this usual rainfall during the wetter winter months to recharge their supplies. During the warmer and drier summer months, demand for water within Cape Town naturally increases, and the rate of water consumption increases alongside it, which depletes the water in the reservoirs behind the dams. Then, when the wetter winter months come along, the water in the reservoirs is generally replenished by the plentiful rainfall, and the cycle repeats itself. These reservoirs provide the more than 4.5 million citizens of Cape Town with water all throughout the year via multiple long pipelines, tunnels, and canals that connect them to each other. But the big problem is that in order for this whole system to actually work, it has to rain. Otherwise, no matter how large the reservoirs of water are, they will start to drain away to nothing from evaporation and consumption without being replenished. And this is precisely what began happening to the Western Cape region in the early part of 2015, when the usual rains of the wet season that year didn't materialize. it was only the beginning of a catastrophic 3-year-long drought that was destined to become the worst in the region's history since modern record-keeping began back in 1933. And later on, researchers would conclude that this severe of a drought was statistically only likely to strike the Western Cape about once every 300 years.
Yes.
A drought of this magnitude, striking at this exact time, was especially cataclysmic for Cape Town, though, for multiple exacerbating factors. First of all, the population of the city had only recently skyrocketed, and the water infrastructure was not built up appropriately alongside of it. You see, for many decades in the past, South Africa was ruled by the racist apartheid regime that forcefully separated white people and black people across the country. The majority black population was denied the right to own land throughout most of the country, and they were denied the right to live in all of the country's most developed areas, like the majority of Cape Town. As a result, the urban core of Cape Town was artificially and forcefully maintained as a white majority area for decades throughout the 20th century, despite the white population overall across the whole country remaining a small minority. In the 1970s, District 6 within Cape Town, one of the few cosmopolitan areas inside the city with a large black population remaining at the time, was declared a whites-only area and completely bulldozed. More than 60,000 of District 6's residents were forcibly removed and expelled towards the Cape Flats area on the outskirts of the city in the harshest example of apartheid-era population control in Cape Town. By 1986, the apartheid laws restricting the movement of people into Cape Town based on race were finally repealed. And this, understandably, led to decades of rapid population growth for the city. Within just 30 years between 1970 and 2000, Cape Town's population more than doubled from 1.2 million people to 2.8 million, while the population of Black African residents increased from less than 10% of the population to nearly a third of the population across the same period. Apartheid officially ended in South Africa during the early 1990s, and between 1995 and 2015, the first year of the catastrophic drought, Cape Town's population increased a further 71%, from 2.4 million people to 4.1 million. However, water storage for the city was only increased by 17% during those same 20 years, which meant that the city's water storage infrastructure was not keeping up with the increasing population and the higher demand. This ultimately led to another factor that exacerbated the water crisis beginning in 2015. Cape Town and the Western Cape region was being locally governed by the Democratic Alliance Party, or DA, while the national government was being primarily led by the rival African National Congress, or ANC. When the water crisis in the city began getting apparent, the ANC blamed the DA for their lack of foresight in constructing new water sources and infrastructure, while the DA conversely blamed the ANC for withholding funding in order to embarrass and sabotage their local government. The DA-led Western Cape government had requested $3 million to increase water infrastructure and supplies back in 2015, immediately before the start of the crisis, but this was rejected by the ANC-led national government. Ultimately, the bickering and divisions between the local and national governments on who was to blame for the crisis would only end up worsening it even more. Other factors were partially to blame as well. An invasive species of water-thirsty plants had infected the reservoir behind this dam in the years immediately leading up to the crisis, resulting in a further loss of an estimated 30 million cubic meters of water from it per year. And unlike many other water-fragile cities throughout the world, Cape Town's water system relies almost entirely on just one single source: rainfall. There aren't really any good alternative sources around the city like large underground aquifers or desalination facilities that transform salty ocean water into drinkable fresh water. Facilities that, up to the point of the crisis, had never been built around Cape Town. Therefore, Cape Town's water system relied on just a single critical point of failure that had been exacerbated by decades of population growth accompanied by underdevelopment of increasing the water supply. And when that single point of failure actually did begin to fail in 2015, the flimsy house of cards began to rapidly collapse. Without the usual rainfall during the Southern Hemisphere winter months of 2015, Cape Town's dams depleted from being 72% full down to just 50% full by the end of the year. And on January 1st, 2016, the city increased water restrictions for the first time to level 2. 2016 then became the second year of drought with hardly any rainfall during the usual wet season, and by May of 2017, the water storage in the dams were at less than 10% of their usable capacity. The drought plaguing the Western Cape was then declared the worst in a century, and then 2017 ended up becoming even worse. That year saw so little rainfall, it became the driest year ever on record for the whole Western Cape province since modern record-keeping began back in 1933, and was potentially the driest year for the province in centuries. By September of 2017, the Cape Town government banned all outdoor and non-essential use of water, and aimed to cut the water usage within the city down to just 87 liters per person per day. For the sake of comparison, the average American consumes approximately 310 liters of water per day. By the following month in October, it was estimated that Cape Town only had around 5 months worth of water still available in storage before they would run completely dry. By the start of 2018, with the drought still strangling the city's water supply, it was estimated that day zero, the day that the city would run out of water, would fall on the 12th of April, 2018, within just 3 more months. Water restrictions were increased to the second highest limit of 6B, severely limiting water consumption to just 50 liters per person per day, or less than 6 times the amount of water the average American consumes. When day zero finally arrived, the city's plan was to shut off nearly the entire municipal water supply and set up 149 water collection points across the town, guarded by armed police, where the millions of Cape Town citizens would have to queue up in line in order to collect a tiny daily ration of just 25 liters of water per person, or 12 times less water than the average American consumes. For more context, 25 liters is only enough water to take either a 3-minute-long shower or flush your toilet 4 times, and either way, that's all your water used up for the entire day. The city's municipal water supply would only be maintained to essential services like hospitals and to buildings within the central business district. But very fortunately for Cape Town, the severe water restrictions worked to curb demand significantly, and the winter months of 2018 finally brought good levels of rainfall to a very thirsty city, finally resupplying Cape Town's 6 crucial dams with water. By September of 2018, the high levels of rainfall, absent for the past 3 years, finally brought the dams back up to 70% capacity, and the apocalypse of day zero was narrowly averted. Water restrictions were finally reduced, and by November of 2018, life for the city had largely returned back to normal, with citizens being allowed to water their yards and gardens, wash their cars, and fill up swimming pools once again. But that doesn't mean that the risk of this happening again has ended once and for all. Global temperatures are only set to continue increasing throughout this century, and alongside that means an increased risk of severe drought-like conditions returning to Cape Town again. The proper time for the city to prepare for a similar event in the future is now, and investing into more water storage and infrastructure is going to be vital. While politically and environmentally controversial, would obviously go a long ways to reducing Cape Town's risk of a single point of critical failure in their water supply system if the rain stops falling for years at a time again. And with more than 3.5 billion people worldwide who will be living in water-scarce regions by 2025, the entire world needs to heed these early warnings and learn their lessons. For as the 21st century continues, water will prove to be an increasingly valuable and scarce resource for a lot of us. And that is
Obviously.
going to cause a lot of problems. After all, a lot of what's happening today and tomorrow are the direct consequences of what happened yesterday, last year, and even last century and beyond.
We should try to conserve more water from now on, wasting water by showering for like 3 minutes there. We'll probably stop doing that. Lebih tahu dia macam ni,